Hey guys, so I have a quick haul for you, or a haul that I'm going to try to keep quick. There was, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what angle you look at it, there was a library sale today. The good angle is because I acquired a lot of books that I think will be very interesting, and they're all nonfiction. They're all on subjects that I'm really interested in. I think I will find all of them very interesting. It's not so good from the perspective of the fact that I already own. I think I already own around or more than 500 books, and I'm only 25 years old. So I think after this, I need to make some concerted effort to not acquire books for some extended period of time. But anyway, yeah. And it's funny because I actually promised myself at the beginning of this year that I wouldn't do any haul videos on my channel this year, just because they seem to have gotten a bit of a bad rap in recent times on BookTube, and I thought, okay, well, that's going to make me feel self-conscious about doing them. And I already sort of feel self-conscious about them because I have done several already, and so it's just like, okay, here I am acquiring even more books that I don't really need because I already own plenty of books. But anyway, the money has been spent, and they were $1 each, so there's not much guilt in that in money regards. So whatever. I'm just gonna go through them quickly, hopefully. And usually with a haul, one last point before I start. Usually with a haul, especially a big haul like this, something that makes me feel better about how big the haul is if I read one of the books right away, at least one of the books right away. And I think I know which one of the books here that I'm gonna read already. And I'll do that one last. But anyway, here we go. So the first book is by Harold Bloom, every booktuber's favorite literary critic. It's called The Anatomy of Influence: Literature as a Way of Life. And so, as I understand it, this is sort of a recapitulation and extension of the theory that really made Harold Bloom famous, the anxiety of influence, which sort of is about how new young poets create their poetry sort of in response to older poets. And I think that theory sounds very interesting, although I have yet to acquire a copy of the book on that theory. But this is supposed to recapitulate that theory and sort of extend it a bit, so hopefully it'll have a bit about that, but yeah. Next is the Dictionary of Native American Literature. And this is really just basically an encyclopedia sort of book, and it basically just lists a ton of authors and has short bios of each one, bibliographies of their major works, and a brief overview of each author's life. And also has some chapters on oral tradition in Native American cultures and stuff like that. So this should be very, very interesting. Not a book that I read cover to cover ever, because again, it is kind of an encyclopedia. It's not like a narrative book, but still very interesting. Next is Hamlet and Oedipus by Ernest Jones, a classic study in psychoanalytic criticism. Of course, psychoanalysis is, well, I won't go into it, but I really love Hamlet. I find it fascinating, and even if I don't agree with psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic literary criticism, I'm sure I will still find this book very interesting and fun to read, just because I love reading about Hamlet, so yeah. Next is an essay concerning human understanding by John Locke, a philosophical treatise about basically how humans think. I learned a little bit about this in a history of psychology class, because it's kind of important in the history of psychology, because it puts forth this idea of a tabula rasa, that each person is born as a blank slate, and their experience is what sort of makes them the person that they become throughout their life. And so, yeah, that should be very interesting. It's actually abridged, I'm just noticing on the cover, which might be for the best, because I know that the actual... I do remember getting a PDF of this book and noticing that it was 700 pages long, so I probably should have caught that. But anyway, it was $1, so I think I'll find that interesting. Next is The Anatomy of Criticism by Northup Frye. Yeah, Northup Frye, a literary critic I was interested in formerly, but just hadn't found any of his books, so now I can start to read some of his work. Next is The Praise of Folly by Desiderius Erasmus. This, I actually already own a copy of this, but the copy I own is a really shoddy Dover thrift edition that will fall apart in 5 years, and where the paper is really kind of grainy and I don't really like it. And this, unlike that copy, has a nice introduction to this book. And I actually have already read The Praise of Folly once, but I read it very quickly. I don't remember much from it. I didn't like it very much, in part, I think, because I didn't love the translation. So maybe I will like this translation more, and maybe this introduction will help me get a bit more out of it. The next one is Poetry Notebooks by Clive James. The subtitle is Reflections on the Intensity of Language. And yeah, it's just a collection of essays on poetry. There are some essays in here that are just generally about poetry, and then a few that are on specific poets. And I love reading about poetry, so that should be great. Next is a book that is right up my alley. It's The Classical Tradition, Greek and Roman Influences on Western Literature by Gilbert Highet. And yeah, a big thing, just going all into how Greek and Roman literature has affected Western literature throughout history, through the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, 19th century, 20th century, everything. And yeah, that's right up my alley, because I love the classics of Greece and Rome, so yeah, glad to find that. The next two were great finds, I thought. The first is Sallust, the Jurgunthine War and the Conspiracy of Catiline, which is a history. Sallust is one of these old Roman historians, and the Jurgunthine War is about a war with Numidia that Rome fought, and the Conspiracy of Catiline was I believe, a conspiracy by a Roman general to take over the Republic and install himself as a dictator, which obviously would end up happening with Julius Caesar and Augustus after him. But so yeah, and apparently this is apparently Celeste wrote quite a bit, but this is all that survives of his work. So that should be interesting. Next is The Rise of the Roman Empire by Polybius, another great Roman historian, and the title is self-explanatory, so that should be interesting. Next is, the cover just says the greatest historical novels, but what this is, maybe you can see the spine there. This is The Virginian by Owen, which I have heard from multiple trustworthy sources on BookTube and outside of BookTube that is the first ever Western, and that at least parts of it take place in Wyoming, and I like reading books that take place in Wyoming, so that should be great. And I also do enjoy Westerns, or at least I'm trying to develop more of a taste for them. I did read, Lonesome Dove last year, I've started to watch some more Western films, so I'm sort of starting to tip my toes into the Western genre in multiple mediums, but this is the first ever Western, at least when it comes to literature, so that should be great fun. It's a lovely edition, like gold pages. I'm not much of one for these like gold page things, but it's still lovely. And yeah, just a lovely book, and really sturdy too, so yeah. Next is Lectures on Don Quixote by Vladimir Nabokov. As you all know, I read Don Quixote earlier this year. I finished reading it I read part 1 last year, I read part 2 this year. And I had mixed feelings about it. But I did look up a couple of essays online about Don Quixote and found that I really enjoyed reading about Don Quixote. So I feel like I should probably enjoy this. And what this also includes, which I think is interesting, as well as just essays on Don Quixote, is a chapter-by-chapter summary and commentary on Don Quixote by Nabokov. So that might come in handy if I ever reread Don Quixote, which I may. I'm not throwing out the possibility, but it won't happen anytime soon, probably, unless I read these essays and they just totally make me feel like I'm dying to reread it. But even if that doesn't happen, I'm sure I will enjoy these essays as just, on their own terms, in their own standalone pieces. Next is The Battle Cry of Freedom, the Civil War Era by James McPherson. This is a part of the Oxford History of the United States, and it's a big history of the Civil War. And I actually watched Ken Burns' documentary on the Civil War twice this year. I love Ken Burns' documentaries, so I'm happy to watch them twice. I also watched his documentary on the West like 3 or 4 times. And that just got me really interested in learning about the Civil War and reading a big narrative history of it. And I would have liked it if it had been the one by Bruce Catton or the 3-volume one by Shelby Foote, but I think this will do. The Oxford History of the United States I know has gotten a good reception. I know David Murphy just did a read-along of the volume in this series that covers the American Revolution, and David Murphy seemed to be enjoying it, so hopefully this will also be enjoyable, although I think it's by a different author than the Revolutionary War one. But yeah, it's a big book. It's probably qualified for March of the Mammoths, but I think I will find it very interesting. And lastly, the book that I think I will be picking up, possibly tomorrow, is Opera 101, A Complete Guide to Learning and Loving Opera by Fred Plotkin. And yeah, this will be my second book on opera that I will have read this year. Yeah, I'm just super excited. It's similar to Vivian Schweitzer's book in that it does a general overview of opera and the history of opera. But in addition to that, so the first 200 or so pages are just an overview of the history of opera and an overview of the different components of opera and things of that sort. And then after that, what it does is it has several chapters that in each chapter Fred Plotkin focuses on one opera for the whole chapter and just uses that opera to stand in for a sort of subgenre of opera. So you have Tosca, where the subtitle is Opera as Drama, and The Barber of Seville, opera and comedy. You have Don Giovanni, classical opera. Eugene Onegin, romantic opera. You have Die Walküre, epic opera, and Electra, psychological opera. And it's not an unsubstantial book, which is great. My only criticism of Vivian Schweitzer's book may have been that it was short. This is not as short. It's also not really a chunker or anything, but it is not an unsubstantial book. So I'm really looking forward to reading that. So yeah, I think that was possibly the fastest book haul that I've ever done. And as always, if you've read these, give me your thoughts, and I hope you all enjoyed. And yeah, I will see you all next week. Bye, guys.